Director of Forestry Education for the Arkansas Forestry Association. And this is part of our monthly Landowners Zoom programs that we're offering, a different world and a different technique for reaching our landowners and anyone interested in the topic being presented. We're offering these called kind of lunch and learn session once a month. We're trying to do the fourth Friday of each month for these programs, these landowner Zooms. So there are other ones scheduled. I do have one scheduled through July. I'm still adding August and on. So we'll have new opportunities to learn different topics from different speakers down the road. But today we have Kyle Cunningham with the University of Arkansas. Oh boy, it's a long title, and I always leave off either the Department of Ag or Division of
Agriculture,
all that stuff. So I'm going to let Kyle introduce himself so he makes sure to cover everything. And this is being recorded. We're going to use the chat feature to address any questions. And we're going to, with a small group, we can probably do questions as they arise, or you can hold them to the end, either way. So I'll just go ahead and turn it over to Kyle.
All right. Thanks, Rob. And yeah, as we all know, going through this past year, this is going to be one of the avenues for us getting information to landowners. And so, one of the things, today we have a small audience. And so that's one of the things that us here at Cooperative Extension and AFA and all of our partners are going to have to work on is making sure we're getting these out to the landowners, general public type audiences. And one of the things that we're going to do with this, I know I see Rachel Bearden's on here. She's one of our county agents and staff chair in Hot Spring County. So I appreciate Rachel being here. I had several county agents that wanted to make it today, but they couldn't. And I'm sure some landowners are in that situation as well. So what I'm getting at is we're recording these and we will put these on. I've created a YouTube page for Extension Forestry for my programs. And I'll share that link here at the end. But, if you have somebody that would like to see this that couldn't make it today, we will have these available in the future. So those are just ways. I still want to do the in-person stuff. We're starting to open back up here at the Cooperative Extension Service as far as bringing people back into the building here in Little Rock. We have probably 150, 200 people in here. So we've been working from home for the last year, basically. But we're looking at getting some in-person meetings back in place and getting those back up and running. And so look forward to having some of those meetings coming up as well. So just wanted to give you a little bit of information on where we are in Extension as well. All right, I'm going to share my screen and get rolling here. All right. That coming through for everyone fine? Okay. All right, let me move some things around here where I can see what I'm doing. All right, again, I'm Kyle Cunningham. I'm Associate Professor of Forestry with the University of Arkansas Division of Agriculture, Arkansas Forest Resource Center. Give you a little bit of background on me. I'm 70% extension and 30% research. And so I do have a research component to my position as well, but I do a lot of outreach with our professional foresters, with our family forest landowners, agencies, and other groups around the state. And today we're going to be focusing on non-industrial private forest landowners, or family forest landowners, if you will. And we're going to, the things we're going to cover today, we're going to obviously hit on forest herbicides, but the things I want to hit on today are why we use forest herbicides, control options that are available to you, application scenarios. That's one of the big things with me is not just presenting herbicide prescriptions or chemicals that you can use to control vegetation, but putting them into scenarios and site conditions and so that you can make a more informed decision on your application that you're going to make. We will walk through some decision support tools that are available to help you make those decisions. And then at the end, we will walk through some resources that are available to you as far as herbicide supply, herbicide applications, who do you go to for information, and those types of things. Okay, a little bit of background. We have approximately 19 million acres of forest land in Arkansas, so it's a large resource. We have 345,000 non-industrial private forest landowners or family forest landowners that hold 11 million acres of that 19 million acres. And so that's a large chunk of forest land around the state for us to assist landowners with and a substantial resource to manage. When we start talking about managing these resources around the state and doing things like herbicide applications, we have to understand that we have a very diverse resource here in Arkansas with regard to our forest base. And so this map on the right here really just is simplifying things a little bit. But if you look at the state in terms of uplands and bottomlands, obviously our upland regions are the Ozark region in the northwest, the Ouachita region in western or west central Arkansas, and then the western Gulf coastal plain in the southwest part of the state. And then we have some major river systems that we deal with in the state that create some bottomland areas for us. Obviously, the Mississippi River floodplain is a major river system that has impacted the entire eastern portion of the state. The Arkansas River, flowing through the central part of the state, provides some bottomland areas in that region. And then we have some more mid to minor size streams and rivers in the southeast part of the state, the coastal plain region. And that would be the Saline River, the Ouachita River, the Little Missouri, and then the Red River as you move to southwest Arkansas. And so you can have some really diverse forest types across the state. If we look at the forest type breakdown, as far as just pure pine forest, only about 30% of the state is in pure pine forest. And a lot of times when we think of timberlands, we think of pine plantations, we think of the timberland region that occurs here in the southwest portion of the state in that coastal plain region. But that really only makes up about 30% of our forest land in the state. A huge chunk of the state consists of upland hardwoods. About 43% of the state is in upland hardwoods. And so that would be the Ouachita region, the Ozark region, Crowley's Ridge over here, and some upland areas in the coastal plain. Bottomland hardwood forest, again, are primarily occur in these areas in darker green. And those are going to be your floodplains, your active floodplains where you have forest lands occurring in those regions. And then we also can have a mix of pine and hardwood growing, and we have that scattered across the state, but primarily here in the coastal plain region where we have both pine and hardwoods together. And so when we start talking about herbicide prescriptions and making an herbicide application, we have to understand where we are, what type of resource we're managing, and what we prescribe in one area may not fit another area of the state, I guess is my take home point here. So let's get into vegetative competition and why are we talking about controlling vegetation on our sites? It's a serious competitor to our crop trees. And when I'm talking about crop trees, that could be natural regeneration. You're trying to naturally regenerate oaks. That could be planted trees or seedlings, loblolly pine or oak seedlings or some other hardwood. So when we talk about crop trees, those are the trees we're trying to grow to the end of a rotation or to achieve a management goal. The competing vegetation is going to compete for sunlight. It's going to reduce the amount of soil, water, and nutrients available to your crop trees, competing for growing space, and can cause a reduction in growth and survival because of these factors. And so the flip side of that, when we control competing vegetation, we're increasing soil and water availability, soil, water, and nutrient availability. We're increasing the amount of sunlight that's reaching the seedlings, and we're increasing their growing space for a period of time. And that's something to keep in mind when you're talking about making an herbicide application and controlling vegetation on a forest site. We're not talking about controlling vegetation every year of the rotation. If you have a 30-year rotation, we're not talking about controlling the competing vegetation for that entire period of time. We're talking about providing a window of time to achieve an objective. And we'll walk through the different scenarios where you may make an application at some point during the rotation. That could be through, during establishment or at some other point during the rotation. But we're not talking about annual applications here. We're talking about opening up a window of time to achieve a specific objective for our forest lands. Okay, one of the first things that I like to do is put the competition into groups, or competition groups, if you will. So if you're going to contact your county agent or your county forester, or contact me directly, and you have a prescription question, the first thing I'm going to ask is, well, what are you dealing with? What are you trying to control? And so if you can just put those into these 4 categories, these are broad categories. If you know the specific species that you're dealing with, those can be really important. Obviously, the more information you have, the better the prescription will be. But if you just can get down to these 4 groups and work around these 4 groups, you're way ahead of the game. And so we're talking about common grasses there. You're talking about Bermuda grass, Bahia grass, Johnson grass, things like that. And then the woody species group, that's going to be your hardwoods primarily. In some cases, you could be controlling pine. We'll talk about that as well. But there you're talking about, persimmon, black gum, red maple, those types of things. And then our broadleaf weeds, we're talking about fireweed, goldenrod, pigweed, things like that, mare's tail, horsetail. And then the vines, excuse me, and then the vines group could be anything from trumpet creeper to kudzu. These things are going to be difficult to control, but again, it's a different vegetation group. And so if you can just put things into these 4 categories, you're way ahead of the game, and you're going in the right direction. You're starting to narrow down what it is you're going to control, and then we can get into how you're going to do it. So what are some of the control options available to us? Obviously, we have either mechanical or chemical. And I want to walk through some of the mechanical operations that are available to us. Walk through some of the mechanical options that are available to us. And that could be anything from mulching to mowing, hand weeding, chainsaw, shearing, chopping, or disking. And you can see I have some of these in red. And the reason that I have that there is from a control standpoint, from a vegetation control standpoint, those are really operations that aren't going to get us where we want to be. If we go in and shear a site, or we don't really do any roll drum chopping anymore, or disking or that type thing, you're really not reducing the competition on the site. You may be providing access to the site or clearing the site, but you're not reducing the competition to, say, any seedlings you're going to be planting on the site. And so you're really not getting control through those methods. Now that brings us to mulching and mowing. Mulching does have its place in competition control. Again, its primary function would be to provide access to a site, to reduce your vegetation heights and that type of thing. You're still, if you're mulching hardwood, you're still going to have stump sprouts and things like that you're going to be dealing with. But one of the things that we found in our research looking at mulching is that you do get a very brief period of time where you have some competition control take place. And that's simply from the mulch itself that you place on the ground. We've seen that in a couple of different studies where you have some effect. It's very brief, where the mulch itself will hold back competition for a period of time. But again, you're really not getting good competition control through a mulching operation. Mowing, a lot of people, particularly if they have old fields and they go out and plant an old field, they think if they go out and mow that field that they're controlling the competition. And to some extent you're providing increased sunlight to the seedlings. And so you're getting some benefit there. But from a water and nutrient standpoint, you're really not increasing those items to the seedlings. Because that competition, nutrients and water, that's going to be more of a root competition factor. And so when you mow, you're really not addressing root competition. particularly from grasses. Grasses can have, really dense matted root systems that are going to be strong competitors to any seedling. And so mowing really doesn't get you to where you want to be there. One of the things that we do with mowing in our projects is gain access to a site for planting. It's great for that. The other thing that mowing does for us, let's say that a site has gotten, it's getting late in the growing season or mid-growing season, and the site's kind of getting away from us a little bit, and some of the plant heights are getting a little tall for us to make an application. Then we can go in and mow and let that resprout and get to a more beneficial height, or a more appropriate height for us to make an herbicide application. And so they do have use, but again, you're not really getting that competition control that we're looking for. And so that leads us over to chemical herbicide applications. And we'll talk about why they're important and the advantages and disadvantages and concerns with chemical applications. Nothing's perfect, so there's going to be concerns with anything that we do. But if we look at chemical applications in forestry, we're typically talking about two types of applications, either foliar applications, and we'll talk about these in more depth in a future slide, or individual plant treatments. And there's applications for both of those in forestry. And so we'll walk through those as we move forward. First, let's talk about the advantages to applying forest herbicides. They're useful on all terrain. We talked about the diverse landscape we have across the state. So whether you're on a steep slope or in a dense cutover, or a flatwood site or whatever, you can make an application with. We have methods for making applications with forest herbicides here. Ease of application. It's not really difficult to get the herbicides in place on site or applied on site. It's quick. It's economical versus mechanical operations. It's one of the things I didn't mention. When you're talking about shearing or mulching or mowing or any of those operations, that these days they can be, because of the cost of running machinery and fuel cost and those types of things, they can be really costly. And so just the economics alone really push us towards utilizing forest herbicides in forest management. There's low disturbance to a forest site. A lot of times that's important to us. We're leaving the vegetation and litter on site. They remain intact. And so you're not having site disturbance there through these herbicide applications. And so there's some real benefit to using forest herbicides. There's also some concerns. We have all seen on the news about the lawsuits occurring with certain chemicals like glyphosate and potential harm to humans using these. And so there's concern there. One of the things that we're fortunate about, and I would really need to cover these in this presentation in light of some of the court cases and things that we've seen across the country and the concerns that we've seen. But our forest herbicides that we use, and we use glyphosate, but they are low toxicity compared to many other herbicides and insecticides and things that are out there. We have long application intervals. It's like I was saying, if we're going to plant an old field or something like that, we might make an application to get those trees in place. And we may not make another herbicide application in there for 10, 15, 20 years down the road. So it's not like we're coming back to these sites and hitting them annually with herbicides. And so, that's one of my goals today, is to present you guys with the idea of making an informed decision and not applying, a lot of landowners' mentality is, well, if 16 ounces works well, 32 ounces works even better. Well, that's not where we want to go with our herbicide applications. And these concerns that we're talking about here are why we want to make sure we're making an informed decision. There are scenarios, and we'll walk through some of these, where you don't need an herbicide application. There are many scenarios where you do, but we'll hit on some of those as we move through the presentation. Many of these have aquatic labels. I talked about glyphosate, for example. A lot of the concern with glyphosate in the court cases has been the personal protection of the applicator, not so much the toxicity of the chemical itself. There are studies taking place right now. There's one at Stephen F. Austin taking place right now, looking at the hydrological impacts of using glyphosate. And of the chemicals that they tested, it actually had the lowest toxicity of any of the forest herbicides that we use to aquatic systems in the study they were looking at. And so we're really not talking about toxicity concerns. That there could be some concerns with the applicators, and we'll talk about that as well. But that's one of the benefits to the forestry suite of herbicides that we have. Our goal again is to make an informed decision and a proper application, so that if someone does come to us and say, "Why are you doing this?" we can say, "Well, this is exactly what we're trying to do, and this is how we got to the decision to do this." Okay, having said that, what are the important considerations? I need to know my crop species. We talked about that earlier. I need to know my primary competitors. We talked about the 4 groups earlier, and we'll hit on those again. The application type that I'm going to use, what type of site do I have, and what type of application type am I going to have to use to make that application on that site? Timing concerns, seasonality of certain herbicides is important, and we'll hit on some of those. Environmental factors, not all herbicides can be applied near or on water, and so you have to understand that. Again, sensitive areas, that goes back primarily to water. When we start having areas that can flood and move herbicides off site, or have rivers or streams nearby, those are sensitive areas. An area that might have some endangered species or something like that, we would have to use some real caution in those areas. So the bottom line is, read the label. Whenever I give an herbicide prescription, and the decision support tools that we walked through today, they're all great, but I always say go back to the label and read the label for that specific application that you're going to be making. So let's get more into the specific application types that are available to us. We could make an aerial broadcast where we fly a helicopter over a site and apply the chemical that way. We have ground broadcast where we could use a skidder or a tractor or a ATV to make those applications on the ground. We can do banded or spot applications where we're actually going out and using a 4-wheeler or a backpack sprayer even, and making really localized, focused applications. We could have directed sprays where we have, sometimes you'll get in a situation where you have some seedlings and there's a certain herbicide you need to spray, but you can't get it on your crop trees. And so in those scenarios, you may have to do a directed spray where you're actually going around and protecting the seedlings and making a very directed application. Individual plant treatment. Those are some important, that is an important application type that we'll talk about, where you want to go in and actually control individual trees or individual plants in a particular forested scenario. And there are applications for that. Okay. Typical application scenarios. And again, let's get back into our forest types. You're going to have different application scenarios based on whether you have pines or hardwoods. In pines, we could have, need for site preparation, herbaceous release, or what we call herbaceous weed control. You might hear HWC referred to there, where we're trying to control broadleaf plants and grasses early in the planting process. Woody release, and I have woody release highlighted here because I want to go ahead and hit on this. What we talk about with woody release, what we're talking about with woody release is we planted some loblolly pine, for example, and it's either the growing season after we planted or the next growing season early in the rotation. And we did not control our woody plants on site, our hardwoods that were on the site prior to planting. And okay, woody release is where we're coming back in after planting and removing those woody stems. And the reason why I highlighted that is we really want to avoid that operation if we can. That's an operation that you really want to take care of up here in site preparation. So the season before you plant the trees, that's when you deal with woody plants the best. That's when we can use the highest rates, and that's when we can use pretty much any of the available forestry herbicides that are out there, is during site preparation. Once you put the seedlings in the ground, woody release becomes more and more difficult. I get these questions all the time where the people have planted trees and then they want to come back and do that operation, and you can do it. It's just that, it's not going to be as effective as it would have been during site preparation. And so, yes, that's an application scenario, but that's actually one we want to try to avoid if we can. Mid-rotation brush control, we'll talk about that some more as well. So let's say we have a pine plantation again that's 15 or 16 years old, and we're wanting to do a fertilization treatment on that plantation. Well, obviously, we don't want to fertilize all of the mid-story and the brush and those types of things that are growing on the site. We want the fertilizer to go to our crop trees. And so that's the scenario where during the middle of the rotation, we would make either an aerial or ground application to control that hardwood mid-story or brushy mid-story that's present in the stand. On the hardwood side, again, we'll have site preparation. It's going to look different than it will when we talk about site preparation for pines, and I'll hit on that in a couple of slides ahead. Herbaceous release, the same thing. Herbaceous weed control is a huge factor when we're trying to establish hardwoods. We'll talk about that. Forest stand improvement. I talked about the individual plant treatments. Well, these two scenarios right here under hardwoods, we're talking about forest stand improvement and natural regeneration site preparation. Both of those are scenarios where we will use individual plant treatments. And I'll talk about that more as we move forward. So a little bit different depending on what your forest type is. So you have to keep that in mind. So let's walk through a couple of these. Site preparation applications. Our goal in site preparation is preparing a site for planting seedlings. And what we're looking at here with herbicide selection or application selection is the cost and the efficacy of that application. So how much does it cost and how much benefit am I going to get from it from a control standpoint and from a seedling growth standpoint? Those are the driving determinant in this selection. Your rates may vary with the species complex on site. So that goes back to the competitor groups that we have. We may have to increase our rates, or we may be able to decrease the rates in some scenarios. That gets back into making an informed decision. You know, just because a general recommendation might be 24 ounces of a chemical, I may have a site that has a light loading of a certain species that's hard to control. And so maybe I can back that down to 16 ounces to the acre. We have lower cost and we have a smaller amount of chemical going out on the site in those scenarios. And so it could increase or decrease based on the species complex on the site. Tank mixes are common in site prep applications. So what a tank mix means is we're applying more than one chemical. Sometimes we can get away with just applying one herbicide, but oftentimes we may have two that we want to apply. And if we have hard to control species, we may have 3 or even 4 herbicides in a tank mix during site preparation. The rates may also vary by the crop species to be planted, and we'll talk about that. Typically, we'll include a non-ionic surfactant or a methylated seed oil during site prep applications as well. And so you do have an adjuvant that you're adding to these tank mixes in most applications. So again, during site preparation, we are typically looking at controlling all 4 of these competition groups. There are some scenarios where we don't want to control woody species, and I'll talk about that in hardwood management. But for the most part, during site preparation, we're wanting to open up a pretty good window for the first 120 days of the growing season, where those seedlings that we're paying all of this money for to get put in the ground are taken care of. And so we're providing that window of opportunity for them to put on root growth and to develop healthy crowns. And so that's why we go back to using tank mixes in these scenarios. Some of the products that are available to us. Now, this is what I want to point out here. I'll go ahead and introduce, I'll show you this in a little while, but we have the U of A Cooperative Extension Service MP 553 is now available. And that is this book right here, which probably is getting cut out by the, by the Zoom, but I'll show you that here in a moment. That is available, and it does put things into silvicultural scenarios. And so that was one of the goals we had of creating that resource. And so I wanted to go ahead and mention that. But so these are the available products, and these are not all of the available products. These are just some of the more common ones. When we talk about site preparation for pine species, and when we're talking about pine here in Arkansas, we're talking about either loblolly or shortleaf. Now, as we move further south, if you get down into Texas and Louisiana, You could pick up species like slash or longleaf pine as well. But here in Arkansas, typically we're talking about two pine species, either loblolly or shortleaf. And it's important to know the difference between those two species, because if I have shortleaf that I'm planting, and we do have the shortleaf initiative now that is promoting planting of shortleaf, some of these chemicals fall out and some of the rates have to be reduced. We can apply much higher rates and many more chemicals on the loblolly than we can even shortleaf. And so that's why knowing your crop species is really important. But I have some highlighted here that are kind of our gold standards, our main players, if you will, in our tank mixes, and that would be imazapyr, glyphosate, triclopyr, hexazinone, and picloram. Picloram is the only herbicide that I'm aware of that we use that is a restricted use chemical in forestry. And this is one I typically, just for your average landowner, I typically don't include picloram in a prescription. That is one that, in my opinion, really needs to be applied by a professional applicator. And we'll talk about when you should look at doing an application yourself and when you need to include a professional as we move through. Okay, so again, just to give you a visual, we're talking about clear cuts, cut over sites, and site prepping those and coming back and planting in those areas. We're talking about controlling everything out here. This was one of our research projects where we did an arsenal and glyphosate application. We were actually coming back and planting some hardwoods here, and skipped ahead on me. And excuse me. So that's why you see the tree tubes out there. But again, we're trying to control everything site prep. I guess that's my take home point there. So let's move over to hardwoods. What does this look like? What do our available products look like with hardwoods? Well, the list got much shorter, didn't it? Site preparation with hardwoods, really we only have two primary chemicals that we're going to use. It's either going to be glyphosate, imazapyr, or a tank mix of those two. And again, we have to be careful with products like imazapyr. The difference between glyphosate and imazapyr, one of the primary differences is glyphosate does not have soil activity. Imazapyr does have soil activity for a period of months after treatment. And so if I apply imazapyr, say I went out in late October, early November, and applied imazapyr to a site prep, and then I came back and planted shortly after that with hardwoods. Well, there's a good chance that I'm going to damage those hardwoods because imazapyr was developed to kill hardwood species, and so was glyphosate. But again, the difference is imazapyr has some soil activity and glyphosate doesn't. What that means is, and I should have this as we move through another slide, but if we're going to incorporate imazapyr into a site prep application for hardwoods, that application needs to be done prior to August or prior during the growing season. And then we would come back and plant that in like February of the next season. So you would have a 6-month window in there before you came back and planted. If you look at the label on Chopper Gen 2, it discusses this, and Polaris SP does as well. You can see we have our product list here for each of the herbicide chemicals. These tables are out of the MP 553, and so they're at the front of each section as you walk through, and we'll look at that more. But again, you're going to have your herbicide, your chemical name, and then the product name. And so there could be many products, but there's only going to be one chemical. But you need to look at I need to take a step back here. You need to look at the label for the specific chemical. If I decide that I am going to apply imazapyr because I have a species that I want to control with that, I need to look at the label. If I'm using Chopper Gen 2, then I need to look at the label for Chopper Gen 2 before I make that application. You'll see in there that it says it's okay to do this and come back and plant hardwoods, but you need to be done with your application by August, and then you don't come back and replant until late in the dormant season of the following year. And so it can be done. You just have to use caution. And the last thing I'll say on that is that the research that we've done with imazapyr and hardwoods has primarily been on oak. And so the oak species, and I have several studies myself where I've used imazapyr for site preparation for planting hardwoods. And as long as we follow the label guidelines, oak species do fine. Now, if you get into some non-oak species, that there may or may not be as much data on those. So you have to be careful with that as well. One of the things I talked about was the first question you need to ask is should I make an herbicide application? And this scenario of site prep for hardwood plantings is one scenario where we may not even need site prep for getting the seedlings established. And the reason why I say that, let's say we have for example, an old field, and we only have a very light loading of, say, some sweet gum across the field, or maybe some persimmon or something like that. And you're only talking about maybe 500-600 trees to the acre, something like that. That's actually a scenario where we want to keep those trees and plant our oak seedlings in those trees. Now we're still going to need to do control of our herbaceous material, our common grasses and our broadleaf weeds. We're still going to need that herbaceous control, but we may not need the site prep where we're coming in and trying to control woody species. If I have vines on site, however, I do need site prep. Once I put hardwood trees in the ground, controlling vines just became extremely difficult, unless I have kudzu, and then we can control that, believe it or not. But I just wanted to go back and point out that example of, when we plant oaks, it's okay to have a mixed stand. We want to have some other species in those scenarios. And so in that scenario, we may not want to control the woody species. Now, if we have thousands and thousands of woody species out there, and they're 4 and 5 foot tall, and there's stump sprouts and that type thing, yeah, our oak seedlings aren't going to survive very well in that. So in that scenario, we would want to do site prep. But it is a question you need to ask yourself. And again, you don't have to understand all of this today. You can always come back to us and we can discuss this, particularly when you get into applying herbicides and hardwoods. The decisions can become difficult and complex. Okay, so that moves us to herbaceous weed control, or HWC applications. The goal of these is to release seedlings from grasses and broadleaf plants. And again, our factor we're looking at here is the cost, efficacy, and timing. I threw timing in here because we can't always apply herbicides. Once we let's talk about hardwoods for a moment. We can't always apply herbicides at specific times, particularly if we plant something like hardwoods. And so but cost and benefit is still going to be the driving determinant here. Herbicide selection is based on many factors. Your site conditions, your hydrology, your soil pH can impact what you apply. Your crop species, again, and your application timing is huge with herbaceous weed control. Okay, again, here are available products for herbaceous weed control for pine, and you can see we have quite a list here. Again, I highlighted some of the ones that we typically use, and that's going to be back to imazapyr, which is your Arsenal AC, metsulfuron methyl, which is Escort XP or Patriot, or sulfometuron methyl, which is Oust XP or Spider. And then there's actually premixes of those in different formulations. And for example, Oust Extra, Spider Extra, those type of things, where you have both of these combined already for you when you purchase the product. Okay, when we go over to hardwoods, again, the list is shortened. Typically, we're going to try to get our herbaceous weed control completed with Oust XP, with sulfometuron methyl. There are some constraints there, though. This is a chemical. If I use it for herbaceous weed control for hardwoods, I have to make the application prior to bud break. Once the bud starts swelling on my hardwood seedlings, I can no longer apply this. And so timing is really critical when we move into herbaceous weed control for hardwoods. If I have grasses present, clethodim, which is Select Max, Intensity, some other products, very good at controlling grasses on site. So if you have an old pasture with grasses in place, we can control those with a gramiticide. Clopyralid, if I miss this window of being able to apply Oust XP, then I'm looking at something like clopyralid during the growing season. I can actually apply this over the top of hardwood seedlings. And Transline is a primary chemical there. And so we have options. My point is, you don't have to understand all of the different prescriptions that are available to you today, but there are options even with hardwoods in post-planting and pre-planting, or pre-bud break, pre-emergent, if you will, where we can come in and control specific vegetation types. Okay, this is just an example of what I was talking about. This is an old field. At one time, the entire field looked like this area on the left where you see the broom sedge and grasses and vines and everything else that was growing out here. We came in and did a glyphosate site prep application on this with 2 quarts of glyphosate per acre, two quarts of Accord XRT2 per acre. And then we came back and banned it. So this was a broadcast application. You see the ryegrass came back the next spring. And then we did a pre-emergent application, and you see the band here is a 4-foot band with Aust XP. And there's actually little oak seedlings that we had just planted in there as well. And so this is a scenario where we did a site prep to control because we had a lot of vines and things we were concerned with. And then we came back and followed that up with the herbaceous weed control for our oak seedlings as a pre-emergent, as a banded application, just to give you a visual on that. Okay, individual plant treatments. Again, here we're talking about doing herbicide injection or basal applications. And there's really 3 primary chemicals available to us here. We're either going to be using imazapyr, glyphosate, or triclopyr. And I'm not going to get into these in too much detail right now, but if you have a need to do some individual plant treatments, either refer to the resources we're going to talk about today or contact us for more information on those. I'm going to try to move us forward a little bit in time here. An example of one scenario where we use individual plant treatments is natural site prep for natural regeneration in our hardwood stands. This is a stand up at a research station at Batesville, where we were going to regenerate this stand naturally. So we're trying to get some oak seedlings established on the ground, and we couldn't do that with the mid-story in place. And so we came in and removed non-oak species, tree species that were 1 to 6 inches in diameter, basically our non-merchantable stems in here. And we increased the sunlight to the ground and increased the oak regeneration in there before we tried to come in and do any mechanical harvesting. And so that's a scenario for individual plant treatments. So decision support tools that are available to you. I mentioned the MP553. We also have the MP44, which is the broader herbicide manual for the Cooperative Extension Service, whether you're in row crops or turf or horticulture or whatever, but we also have a forestry section in there. The difference is the MP553 is specifically for forestry applications. And so that's out there and available. And you go to our new website, if you're not aware of this, is www.uaex.uada. That didn't used to be in there. So you have to add this in the middle now, and then it's .edu. And we'll go to the site here in a moment, but you go to environment and nature and then to the forestry section, and you can get to the MP553 there, or you can search our publication list. There's a web application that I'm going to walk through real quickly, and it's located at Texas A&M's Texas Forest Info site, and it has a long address here, but if you'll just Google Texas Forest Info, it'll take you to that site. Okay, let's start with the MP553 and what is included in the MP553, the things we talked about today: site preparation for both pine and oak, release or herbaceous weed control, early rotation release for woody plants. Even though I said we don't want to do that, there's still going to be scenarios where that arises. Mid-rotation release, individual plant treatments, and then there's a section on forest roads and fire lanes. And this is a really neat section. If you have fire lanes around your plantation or forest roads going through your property and you want to manage for specific vegetation on those, we have a section for that. Okay, one of the things that's really important though is you need to know how to use the manual, whether you're on the website or using the MP553. And so up here at the top, you'll see we have imazapyr, glyphosate here, and then we have the acid equivalent per acre in pounds that you're going to apply. And obviously, we're not expecting you to understand all the science that's going on there. So step one, look at the amount of parent chemical per acre for each herbicide recommended to meet the prescription objectives. And then this is where you as a landowner or forest manager are going to come in, and you're going to see that there's different rates for each of these chemicals. You can see here we have imazapyr in gray, and then we have glyphosate in gray in the middle section here. You're going to select one product and use that one rate for that product. Okay. And so we're not going to apply Arsenal AC and Chopper Gen 2. We're only going to apply Arsenal AC at 24 ounces to the acre. And here we selected Accord XRT2 at 5 quarts to the acre. And so that would be our tank mix. What this is showing you is all the available rates and products that are available for each of these chemicals. And so some of these are brand names, some of these are generics. And so, but you know, if you want to go with a generic such as Polaris AC, that's fine. But you need to adhere to the rates here, or even better, go to the label and make sure you're following the label rates as well. Select a surfactant. Would I use a surfactant in these situations? Here, we would use a surfactant, and it talks about non-ionic surfactant there. Select an application method. We'll give you some very general guidelines on if you can make an aerial application or a ground application, or if both could be made, and then some adjustments you might want to make. But we are not replacing labels. And so this is just getting you going in the right direction with the application guidelines. The main thing we're wanting you to get from our pages is what products am I going to use and what rates do I need to look at using. And then the application timing we're going to look at finally. And so that's how you walk through the manual or the website. All right, so we're going to quickly hit on a few scenarios. Scenario 1 will be planting loblolly pine in a cutover. Our vegetation groups we're trying to control will be woody plants, herbaceous, and vines. And so basically everything. Control needs, we need site preparation, and we need herbaceous weed control. Okay, I'm just going to go ahead and introduce these, and then we'll go over to the website. Scenario 2, we're prepping this area for nitrogen fertilization and a pine plantation. Here again, we want to control our woody plants, our herbaceous and vines, and our control need here is mid-rotation brush control. We're primarily focusing on controlling the woody plants in this scenario. Okay, and then I wanted to throw in the forest road because that is a section in there. And so that's a scenario where I may have a forest road here, and I have some native grasses there, some warm season grasses that I don't want to kill. And so if I just go out and grab one of those site prep tank mixes, I'm going to kill everything out there. So what do I do in those scenarios where I want to control my woody plants, my broadleaf plants, and my vines, but I want to leave my desired grasses on site? And so we'll talk about that as well. Okay. So I'm going to go out of this for just a moment and stop sharing. Minimize this. Give me just a second here. Okay, everyone should be seeing Texas Forest Service, Texas Forest Information Portal website. If you're not, let me know. So if you go to, this is going straight to the website. And so let me do this real quickly first though. Yeah, so if you want to go to the written manual, you go to uaex.uada.edu. This is our extension page that I talked about. You will go to managing your woodlands. So first you go to environment and nature, then you go to forestry, and then you go to managing your woodlands, forest vegetation management, and you'll see the MP553 right here. If I click on that, we see that comes up, and this is what the publication looks like. It's a long publication. You can print it. I do have printed copies here. And I do have some in my office. If you would like a printed copy, I can mail you one. Some people just like to have the printed copy on hand. But you can see there's a lot of information here on how we got to where we are. And then you can see let's go down here. You can see some of the prescriptions that you'll see for each of the different silvicultural scenarios. So briefly, just wanted to introduce that. And then I need to move this right here. Okay, so, but to get to what I want to introduce today, which is the web-based decision support tool, you go to texasforestinfo.tamu.edu or just Google Texas Forest Info and this will come up. You're going to scroll down. They have a lot of apps on here. You're going to scroll down. This is the one we developed, Forestry Herbicide Prescriptions. Okay, and you go in and open the application, and then you can see this is the window you get here. And you have, just like if you go to Home Depot or a tire store or anything like that, on the left side over here, you have some drop downs. Some of this is still in development. If you get into the more specific things like your difficult to control plants, there's a long list here. Some of these may not be completely developed yet, but our primary things in here are developed, such as selecting your primary crop. You can select whether you're dealing with loblolly. If I click on longleaf, you can see our list of available. These are little cards here that you can click on to get prescriptions. And based on our crop species, I can click off of that and it expands the group. If we go to oak, you can see our group gets shortened, and these are only herbicide applications specific to oak crop trees. So that's one way we can do that. But let's just walk through our scenario. And again, this is just a brief introduction. And so our primary crop here is going to be loblolly pine. We're looking at doing site preparation. And we're going to cut over. So let's see, application type. Really, I don't have to narrow this down anymore. If I knew I had to apply this from the air, I might come in and do aerial only. You can click on that. I'm not going to do that today. But if we just wanted to do site preparation for loblolly pine, you can even do site type. We have some of this may not be as well developed yet as well. A recently harvested site. And so we're narrowing down our list of chemicals that are available over here. And you can hide the filters if you want. But I'm just going to click on our gold standard here. And this is why I didn't walk through too many scenarios when I was walking through the slides. So imazapyr and glyphosate, that's kind of our gold standard for if you just say I'm going to site prep a cutover and plant loblolly, this is the prescription that I'm going to give you without any additional information. And so you can see here up at the top, we have imazapyr and glyphosate, the amount of acid equivalent per acre in pounds that we're applying of each chemical. So there's 2 chemicals in this tank mix. So here we would either apply 24 ounces of arsenal AC, and because it's site prep, we really want to go down here with, haven't introduced any of this information yet, but the Chopper Gen 2, Polaris SP, those type things, they are designed for site preparation applications. And so it's still imazapyr, but they actually have some other ingredients in there mixed in with them that make them a better site prep chemical, if you will. You do use a higher amount, but they have a lower amount of active ingredient. There's a reason for that. Basically, it's a half rate, and so you're having to apply 48 ounces instead of 24. But there's some other ingredients in there that make those really good site preparation products. Doesn't mean you can't use arsenal AC, and there are some scenarios where you can't. You would want to do that instead of the Chopper Gen 2. But for the most part, you're wanting to use the Chopper Gen 2. Glyphosate, gosh, there's a ton of glyphosate products out there. Roundup that you go to Walmart and purchase, Roundup Pro Concentrate is in here. Typically, one of the big players for us is going to be this Accord XRT2. You'll typically see that used, or one of the generics of that formulation. And again here, so if we selected Accord XRT2, we would do 5 quarts of glyphosate per acre and say 48 ounces of the Chopper Gen 2 per acre. Again, you see the non-ionic surfactants. And so there's a lot of information here. And then, if you go to the label, it's even going to be, there's even going to be more information. One of the things you'll see in here is this is based on a fall planting of containerized seedlings. If I'm doing a winter planting of my, I need to move this if I can. Yeah. Sorry. Okay. If let me close this out. If I'm doing a winter planting, you can see I clicked on the other card there. Now I have a winter planting. This is your traditional planting where I'm going to come in, buy some bare root genetically improved seedlings from the Forestry Commission and go out and plant those seedlings. Then there's some different timings involved here if I'm going to do a winter planting versus the fall planting. All right, so that's just a quick introduction to that. Our other scenario what was it? We were going to do mid-rotation brush control. So mid-rotation woody control. And you can see there's not a whole lot of chemicals here available or tank mixes available to us to do that. And again, here we can go in, let's say we had some waxy leaf species present. When you get down in the southern part of the state and down into southern portions of the Western Gulf, you can run into that. So I might want to use imazapyr and triclopyr here. And you can see we developed this for the Western Gulf. You can see Yopon control. We don't really have Yopon here in Arkansas, but we can have some waxy leaf species that we're dealing with. American holly, those types of things can be present in the coastal plain region of Arkansas. And so this would be a scenario where we want to go in, do a fertilization treatment, and we want to control the woody material that's in that pine plantation before we do our fertilization treatment. And so here we would have, again, you would select your rate. One thing, if I select chopper Gen 2 for mid-rotation brush control, I cannot spray that over the top of my trees. So if you have trees that are 20, 30 foot tall, you cannot come back in with chopper Gen 2 over the top of those. You can with Arsenal AC, but not with chopper Gen 2. And I would not want to spray triclopyr over the top of any pines. And you can see here for the application ground guidelines, this is a ground application method. So you would get in there with a skidder and make that application. Okay, and you can see we do have ratings for itemized performance. Here we're most focused on woody control, and you can see we have that highlighted, and you're going to get excellent woody control, 4 stars here. And I'm not going to walk through these today. If you want more information on those, feel free to contact me. So, that would be that scenario. Okay, and then the final one, and I'll try to get us wrapped up here pretty soon, get to some questions and some discussion. The final one, let's turn all of this off. One of the things, you can go up and clear your filters. Just click that button and it'll clear all your filters. Let's see, maintain forest roads. That's what I wanted to walk through. Let's say we have a fire lane we're wanting to maintain, and we have some native grasses out there, little blue stem or something like that, and we're wanting to control everything except for our grasses. And right now, the chemicals we have loaded in here are triclopyr and aminopyrrolate, which is milestone. Triclopyr, that's your garline. If you're familiar with pasture applications, that's going to be remedy in the pastures. But for the forestry applications, we're talking about garline. Excuse me. So let's just look at the tank mix of these two chemicals. And there's a product called Capstone that I'm sure is still available. Is one of the things we have to do with this decision support tool, is make sure that the products that were out there when we put the cards in here are still available, because they change a lot. So there is some upkeep on this. But you would do 9 pints of Capstone. And you can see here, grass control, there's none. Neither one of these chemicals provide grass control under the itemized performance over here. But we get excellent control of broadleaf weeds here. Here's one of the issues at this rate with these chemicals: your woody control is not going to be the best. You get pretty good vine control. So that's one concern we have when we start talking about these maintaining these fire lanes and forest roads, is controlling the woody component can be difficult without harming the grasses. So you're going to get some woody control here. You're going to get good vine control and good broadleaf control is the point there. And the take home is you're not going to injure your grasses that are on site. All right, let me go back and finish up on our slides for sake of time here. Let's see, let me share my screen. Make sure I'm sharing my screen again. Okay, we're sharing the screen. Okay. Kick me back to the beginning. I didn't want to be. All right. So to bring all of this home, and let's get to some discussion and questions. When considering making an application, identify your application goals. Identify your crop species that you have present. Identify your major competitors or your competitor groups. Identify the application type. Identify the application constraints, and seek professional assistance. As you can see, I do have landowners who are capable of making these applications, but in many instances, that is not the case. And so in those scenarios where you don't feel comfortable doing this and it's a big operation, seek professional assistance, make an informed decision. So what are some of those resources that are available to us? From a supply and application from our private distributors here in the state, we have Nutrient Solutions and Red River Specialties. Nutrient Solutions, we have Pat and Jordan And you can see the contact information there. If you need this, feel free to contact me. And then Remy Pierce with Red River Specialties. And you can see the contact information there. Both of those provide very similar services and the same products. So it's really up to you who you want to deal with there. But they can, if you need to make an aerial application, they can get you lined up on that. And if you need to get prices on herbicides and a supply of herbicide, they can help you with that. Consulting foresters. Many of our consulting foresters in the state also do herbicide applications. And if they don't, they can help you walk through those questions that we brought up through the presentation today. So I really encourage you to include a consulting forester. Or applicators. There are also applicators that you can go and find and work with yourself. Join the AFA. I'll give Rob and the guys at AFA and gals at AFA a plug here. Join the Arkansas Forestry Association. Join that network of landowners, forest landowners who are managing their land in a similar fashion to you. Us here at the Cooperative Extension Service, and you've already seen our webpage. Obviously, you can contact me or any of our county extension agents. The Arkansas Forestry Division, who I've already mentioned, this was the Arkansas Forestry Commission, and now they are part of a division under the Department of Agriculture. And again, here's their website. And again, you can just Google the Arkansas Forestry Division. That will come up. NRCS, Game and Fish Commission, if you're more wildlife-based with your management, they may have some suggestions on herbicide applications in those scenarios. And so there's a lot of resources available to you. And obviously the public ones are more or free, so to speak, and then your private ones are going to cost a little bit. If you're looking for a vendor or a consulting forester and you just want to see a listing of what's available, go to the Arkansas Forestry Division and go to, I believe it's called just vendor list or something like that. There's a tab on their homepage. And you click on there and you can actually say you wanted to make a ATV application. You knew you were going to need to have a banding application done. You can actually select that on there and they will pull up vendors in the state that make those types of applications. And so that's a tremendous resource for you to find applicators that make specific applications. Okay, here's my contact information, and I'll end the presentation here, but I'm located here on South University Avenue here in Little Rock. My email address has changed. I need to state that. It's kcunningham@uada.edu.